It has been a tumultuous couple of years in Indian politics, a challenging time for freedom of expression there. There was a test case earlier this month when two young women in Mumbai were arrested for Facebook posts that they put up following the death of a prominent politician. For a country that proudly calls itself the world's largest democracy, Indian institutions are proving to be pretty touchy over what gets said online. It's a media market of 1.2 billion people, and the news industry there keeps growing. However, quantity and quality do not always go hand in hand. The journalism, certainly the televised version, has a very uniform look to it, regardless of what news channel you're tuning into. One person whose voice does stand out is Tarun Tejpal, the founder and editor of India's leading independent news and current affairs magazine, Tehelka. Tehelka is the Hindi word for sensation. Tarun Tejpal says his goal was to create a publication committed to constructive, crusading journalism, to counter the frivolity of the Indian mainstream news narrative and to hold power to account. It was inevitable the magazine would ruffle feathers, most of them political. The publication first came to prominence in early 2001, when its website exposed match fixing in Indian cricket.
Small gift for the New Year party.
Later that year, it documented a culture of bribery at the Ministry of Defense, leading to the resignation of the defense minister. That journalistic sting operation almost led to Tehelka's downfall as well. After police raids and a lengthy judicial inquiry, the number of staff fell from 125 employees to just 3. After more than 2 years of defending itself, Tehelka, with the help of India's cultural elite, was reborn as a weekly newspaper. Today, Tehelka's brand of journalism is attracting more and more readers, both in English and in Hindi. But how long can Tehelka last? After all, its own story reveals both the promise and the perils of muckraking journalism in modern India. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi sat down with Tarun Tejpal in London.
Tarun Tejpal, welcome to the Listening Post. You know, the news business in India is booming. On TV alone, there are nearly 100 news channels broadcast in all of the 13 languages. So when you do go back to India and when you're flipping through the channels, what is your assessment of the journalism that's on offer to Indians today?
Well, it's both good and bad. The bad part really is that it's all much too much the same. So the curious thing is that while the number of media outlets are multiplied, the focus of the concerns is narrowed. The problem with that loud sameness is that it drowns out the complexities of India. On the good side, the amount of media focus that we have today is constantly putting questions to power. The media pressure on big issues is constant. All in all, I'm definitely for the efflorescence of media, for the multiplicity of media, because I think India's greatest prophylactic against oppressive regimes of any kind is really the multiplicity of media. But there will be good and bad, but hopefully they keep cancelling each other out.
As a journalist, as a media entrepreneur, how difficult do you find it to stay away from the two kind of themes that seem to dominate so much of Indian television, at least, which is Bollywood and cricket?
Indians love spectacle. We love the tamasha. You know, we love Bollywood is tamasha for us. Cricket is tamasha for us. Life is a bit of a tamasha for us. So inevitably, even news has become a bit of a tamasha. I think it's disappointing. Tehelka steers clear of them largely. Our concerns are really the big issues of inequality, injustice, human rights violations. But that is Tehelka's mandate. You have to understand that in a country of 1,200,000,000 people, even if I sold 1 million copies of Tehelka, it would be a drop in the ocean. But if I can inflect policy, if I can get one minister to make a judgment call which is beneficial, that impacts tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. I think anyone in an editorial position in India today needs to understand the framework of our challenges, which are huge. And if you understand the framework of those challenges, then you know where you should put your resource, both human and financial, and the work you need to do. Often, I think we don't do it.
Earlier this year, we interviewed an online political cartoonist, Asim Trivedi, and he told us that his website, Cartoons Against Corruption, had been pulled offline by political operatives who didn't like what he was doing. And then in September, we saw Asim Trivedi being arrested in Mumbai on charges of sedition. You know, this is the latest in a series of increasingly more aggressive moves by the Indian government to clamp down on online content. What's happening here? Can you explain what's motivating it?
This is very much part and parcel of a kind of very fractious landscape that India is becoming. There will be battles of this kind all the time. The tragedy is that it's not actually cohering with the founding vision of India. You know, Nehru, even in 1951, had advocated the abolition of sedition laws. And in fact, when I met the Minister for Information and Broadcasting the very night that Asim Trivedi was arrested, it's the first thing I told her. The good news is the very next day he was bailed out. So good sense had prevailed. I just think it's a kind of time in India where media will be negotiating a minefield. And that's okay because India is a bit of a minefield right now.
At a media forum in Goa last year, you said that the problem with Indian media is that the news you get, the journalism you get, is not paid for by you. So who is paying for Indian journalism, and why do you think they're the problem?
All across the world, readers in free societies do not want to pay for the journalism, and journalism costs. Good people cost. We sometimes pursue stories for six months and come up with nothing. All these things cost a lot of money. Somebody has to pay for it. Every single week, every single month is a tightrope walk at the Hilka. 50% of my life goes in looking for resources and investment to keep the work going. So I go and seduce very rich men with the idea of doing a journalism that's actually antithetical to them, you know. And the good news is that obviously it can be done since we are still around 8 years later. But it's a tough call. It weighs you down. The only future I see in free societies of high quality journalism that does not owe its existence to corporations is the setting up of trusts and collectives which have been funded and allow journalists a free work. If we deem journalism to be core to the survival of free societies, then we've got to figure a mechanism by which we can free them up from this very obvious commercial control. In India, you will see hundreds of political expose every year, but you won't find one good corporate expose ever, because at the end of the day, that's the hand that feeds you. You don't bite it.
One of the biggest scandals to hit India's media in recent times was the leak of these recorded conversations between prominent Indian journalists and a lobbyist, Neera Radia. Now, on the tapes, we heard journalists agreeing to pass messages between political parties. We heard one of them arranging a kind of set-up interview with a CEO. What do you make of the conversations you heard on that? What does it tell you about the state of Indian media?
I'm actually pretty conflicted about that. I like the fallout of that it's led to a process of inquiry and cleaning up. But I'm very conflicted about private conversations being so easily made public without all the context being in place. I mean, and you have to remember that journalists don't exist in isolation. They're not sort of avengers out of, hell or something who exist in complete isolation. At the end of the day, you're very much embedded into the same ecosystem that you write and report about. If you're part of that ecosystem, you're going to both feed off that ecosystem and speak the language of that ecosystem. What you put out officially, finally, on a piece of paper or on television is really your true testimonial. And that's what you've got to be judged by.
Everyone has an opinion on the media. And in India, the media is almost as much the news as the news is. What do you think Indian media is missing today? My
complaint against most media and people running media is that they don't even understand what the true story of India is today. It's taken us years with some of the big narratives that Tehelka has fought for. For example, the Maoist narrative in central India, where we had reporters on the ground for years and still continue to do, to begin to even get that information out so that other media could begin to feed off it and respond to it and amplify it. Similarly with the Muslim issue, it took us years of hard work to actually bring to the fore the obvious prejudices that existed in the system against Muslims. This is the stuff that people who guide Indian media and helm Indian media need to know, that this is a country that actually needs fabulously illuminating journalism to bring across stories that are being buried, because they will not be buried, they will actually all erupt as a million mutinies, which is what is happening in India today. You have trouble all across the board. And a lot of that does not get reflected in an intelligent way by Indian media.
Well, Tarun, thank you so much. And thanks for speaking to the Listening Post.
Pleasure to be here.